My name is Christopher Maisano, and this is my story. So I grew up in a Melbourne town, West Melbourne, in an Italian family. In my street alone, there were 7 houses lived in by relatives of mine, which were like aunties and uncles and cousins and grandparents. They all lived in my street. I basically lived in a real life version of Everybody Loves Raymond. So my dad was the pastor of a church in East Melbourne, which made me a minister's kid. So yeah, we attended church as a family every week. So being a pastor's kid made me the coolest kid at church. It meant that on Sundays I could go to church and everyone loved me. Everyone wanted to hang out with me. I was kind of like the golden child there. And I had a golden ticket to heaven. Basically meant that I had a fast track pass, and no matter what, I was going to heaven because my dad was a pastor. My primary school life, however, was extremely different. I wasn't the cool kid at school. I wasn't the kid that everyone wanted to play with. I basically had a whole bunch of school friends that would play a game with me at lunchtimes, which was called Ditch Chris, which basically involved my primary school friends running and hiding from me during playtime and lunchtime. So I had to find my friends, and I was basically being bullied and I didn't even know it. I didn't really understand why I was the cool kid at church on Sundays and why everyone loved me there, but at primary school no one loved me and I was always being ditched by my friends. So because of my primary school life and because of the way things were in primary school, I basically made a pact with myself that high school was going to be different. I was going to do whatever it took to be the cool kid. And it wasn't long before I found myself hanging out with all the wrong kids, doing all the wrong things. I remember sneaking out to parties when I was probably like 12, and there'd be alcohol there, and that seemed like the only way to be one of the cool kids. By the time I was 15, I started taking party drugs, pills, speed, and then by the time I was 18, I tried almost every party drug under the sun. I basically started living a double life. On Sundays, I'd still go to church and raise my hands and say all the right things during the week. And on weekends, when I wasn't around my parents, I'd go out and I'd get into all sorts of trouble, and then I'd come home and pretend nothing happened. So all wasn't lost. I'd been blessed with an amazing creative gift. Ever since I was young, I wanted to be an artist and a designer. And so at the age of 18, I got a job at a small creative agency in Melbourne. And I worked extremely hard. By the time I was 22, I was creative director of one of the biggest agencies in the world. And I had all the major clients, all these big brands that I was working with. I also started running with a couple of friends of mine a Friday night at one of Melbourne's biggest nightclubs, which meant that I basically got to party on a Friday night as much as I wanted. In fact, I got to party at any club as much as I wanted.
Make some noise!
It all looked good on paper. The 6-figure salary, the awesome clients. I had a great job. I got to party at my own nightclub on the weekends. I basically lived the life of a rock star. So I now had hundreds of so-called friends. Not a single one of them would ditch me like they did in primary school. On the flip side to that, I started distancing myself from my parents. Before I knew it, I was doing cocaine every Friday night. Every Friday night became every Saturday night. Before I knew it, I started doing cocaine during the week. I even had a nickname, Lazwa Stylie, which meant I could keep my real life private and no one would know who I really was. I'd tell anyone getting in the way of my lifestyle of fun and partying that I was simply busy or travelling for work. It was just that easy. By the time I was 28 years old, I was kind of a bit over the design and creative industry. I'd worked really hard, sort of won a bunch of awards, and I kind of wanted to start my own fashion label. So I thought, you know what, while I'm 28 and while I've got a bunch of money saved, off I'll go. And that was when I was introduced to ice. When you've been introduced to a drug like ice, and you've got a heap of money, it's very easy to lose it all. So within the first week, I'd probably spent, $4,000 to $5,000, and within a couple of months, I'd probably spent tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't long before I lost my apartment, my nice car, and very, very quickly, a lot of my friends were gone. And the ones that I did have, I didn't know how to reach out to them and didn't want to tell them about my addiction. The ones that reached out to me, I wouldn't respond to. It suddenly felt like I was playing a game I played once in primary school, Ditch Chris, except this time I was playing it all on my own. So over the next few years, I tried to rebuild, and started working with other nightclubs. Did all the creative for a music festival, and again, music festivals surrounded by drugs, clubs surrounded by drugs. Just the whole scene just ate me up alive. Instead of doing better, I just went so much worse. And I slowly just started hurting everybody around me, including all my family, who just didn't know what to do. I was so distant from the person I grew up as and the kid I once was. I just became a completely different person. I started living completely in the past. I once did this, I once did that, I once was. My family, I wouldn't know where I was for days on end. I just became a mess. The more I tried to hide it, and the worse my addiction got, the more everyone knew how bad I was and how bad things had become, that they just, I guess, gave up on me. They didn't know what to do. Everyone had sort of tried and tried and tried. My parents would reach out to me. My parents were praying for me. My parents were doing anything and everything for me. They would call me, they would try and contact me, and I wouldn't respond. I'd go days without responding. If anything, I'd be upset at them for trying to contact me, because I'd be like, leave me alone. The last thing I wanted them to know is that I was at a hotel using ice, or up for 3 days. It was really hard. That was really hard. Especially not seeing my family desperately trying to reach out to me and trying to get me to wake up to where I was at. That was hard. I guess I just couldn't admit that I had failed. I guess I just didn't want to admit that I'd been defeated by a drug that I'd taken, and it had me. It just had a hold of my life and was not letting go.
And so at the start of this year, I decided I would move to Sydney, away from the life and people I'd surround myself with. And came to 180TC to rebuild. I've been in the program for 6 months now, and what a journey it has been. If it wasn't for 180TC, I wouldn't have been able to rebuild and repair the relationship I'd left in absolute ruins with my family. If it wasn't for 180TC, I wouldn't have a real group of friends, support and love from people who just love me for who I am, and not because of any other reason. And if it wasn't for 180TC, I wouldn't have built a real relationship with God. You see, I was looking for acceptance and love from everyone else in my life, when the only thing I should have been chasing was God. The best thing about God is, He will never play Ditch Chris with me. He will never hide from me and make me try and find Him. In fact, God has been searching and trying to find and rescue me my whole life. In the future, I see myself using my creative skills to honour and worship God, a newfound relationship with my family full of honesty and truth, a godly wife and children of my own, and all the right people in my life who are going to give me wisdom and help me walk the rest of my days clean and drug-free. Thank you.
I'm just so grateful that God has rescued my life and saved me.